Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Nielsenot, and I am speaking to you on behalf of the Sustainability Committee. Thank you for coming today. We're going to start out with our keynote presentation from Jason Beverlin, who is the Assistant Deputy Director of the Emaquan, and he works with the Nature Conservancy. After that, we will move into student presentations. And so we will move through that, and just so you know, students who are presenting, we have mics for you so that it can be recorded, so people can hear you, and so that it can be recorded clearly. So as the person before you is presenting, please come up and see me, and I will give you the mic so we can just kind of switch through and get through them. And so without further ado, let's hear from our keynote speaker, Jason Beverlin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me here today. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I work for the Nature Conservancy, as I was introduced with working mostly at our Emaquan project. But I thought before I got into that, I wanted to cover a couple of other things with you as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Nature Conservancy is. Then I'm going to focus in on the Illinois River, because that's really why we're doing the Emaquan project. And then I'll get into some details about the specific work that I'm doing at Emaquan. The Nature Conservancy is the largest private not-for-profit conservation organization in the world. We have projects and programs in all 50 states. We're in 36 countries, and we have about 3,500 employees. So when we get into a project, we have a lot of resources to back it up, and we have a lot of knowledge. We've been in existence since about 1951, and we're a science-based organization. So a lot of the decisions, a lot of the projects, a lot of the programs we get involved with, they start with a foundation of science. That's real important to us. We have a mission, just like everybody does. Ours is pretty simple. I love it because I can actually remember it, although I'm going to look at it when I say it so I don't forget something. Conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And we really are focused on that. We're driven towards that. We pay attention to that as we make decisions about the projects and programs we get involved with. We have about 1 million members worldwide. We are a not-for-profit. So we're not the government. We're not with the state of Illinois or the federal government. We are a private not-for-profit. So we work with donations from folks, and we work with the membership dues that we get from people. This is a little awkward. We own and manage the largest network of private preserves in the United States, and we have about 119 million acres that we've protected. That's about the size of the state of California. So again, that gets back to we have a lot of experience to back up the projects that we've been doing around the globe. Specifically here in Illinois, all of these bright orange dots represents places we're working today. We've got a lot of experience not only with wetlands like the Emaquan project, but also with tall grass prairie like at Nachusa Grasslands. We even have a remnant prairie that we own kind of inside Chicago called Indian Boundary Prairie. So we've got a lot of projects and a lot of properties in this state and almost every corner of the state. We've got 33,000 members just in Illinois, and we have about 1,500 volunteers throughout the state as well. So we've got a lot of resources just in this one chapter of the Nature Conservancy. We were started in '57, so we weren't long after the initial process of the Nature Conservancy getting formed. All right, enough about that. I'm going to move on to the actual project that I work on, and I'm going to start, as I said, with a little bit about the Illinois River. I'm going to talk about this red line that I've got going from Chicago all the way down to its confluence with the Mississippi River in around Grafton. Now, this whole thing is not the Illinois River. This little piece up here is part of the Chicago River and the Sanitary Canal and other stuff. But that's the focus of the Nature Conservancy's Illinois River program, and it's a part of our Emaquan program. So that's a really important piece of our programmatic, I guess, work here in Illinois when it focuses on our freshwater systems. I love this map. You don't have to worry about these right now. I just want to look at this one. This is 12,000 plus years ago. And a lot of folks don't realize that the ancient Mississippi River, which today flows down here, actually used to flow through the state of Illinois. If we were in Peoria, or if you were on the banks of East Peoria today looking at the Peoria Lakes, that's actually the ancient Mississippi River floodplain. From a restoration standpoint, that's really important because we've got this huge river system with a small Illinois River in it. That gives us a lot of opportunities to do restoration. Now, after glaciation, the Kankakee Torrent, and a bunch of other things that took place, we wound up with kind of the current system that we have today. But again, when you think about the Illinois River and you think about restoration, remembering that that used to be the Mississippi River is really important. I've got a quick video that's going to talk about how this river used to function that I think will give you a good idea of how this was 100 years ago.
If I could take you back thousands of years ago to when people first occupied this landscape, they would have seen a scene much like we see behind us. These broad wetland areas would be areas that people would take advantage of for food, materials for other basic needs like shelter and so on.
In the early 1900s, the Illinois River was one of North America's most ecologically and economically significant river systems. It supported the most productive inland commercial fishery and highest mussel abundance per mile of any stream on the continent. As European settlers came to the area in the 20th century, the wetlands were drained and the land plowed for farming.
And in time, this became a cultivated landscape, cut off from the river to promote cultivation and protect the crops. This was the first major transformation to the landscape, where once there were wetlands, now there were row crop fields.
So this video is a good introduction to what the river was and kind of how it started to change in the early 1900s. So historically, it was a very productive fishery. It was a very productive mussel habitat, and the mussel industry and all kinds of things were going big. We started to see changes. This is what the river system kind of looked like in the early 1900s. What I love about this picture is it's hard to tell where the river is versus the backwater areas. Very diverse, very dynamic system, very good for plants, very good for critters. Paddlefish, for example, could be in the river and make its way into these backwater areas, which are real important to its life cycle. So early explorers would come through here, get lost. This was pretty dynamic. Can you find the river in this picture? Lots of changes have happened. This is Chicago, and of course, what we've been working on since about 1905 on, is really trying to contain that river and use the river in different ways. There are benefits to society for some of these things, there's no doubt, but there's also costs to doing some of these things. Here in Chicago, they've really tried to keep the water in its banks, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because Chicago is a great place to start the story of the river. You can see here, this is Chicago's right around in here. This is the Chicago River. Chicago used to dump their sewage into this river. The river drained into Lake Michigan. Chicago got their drinking water from Lake Michigan. Those things don't add up. So they actually engineered a solution. They reversed the flow of the Chicago River. They literally flushed all of their river, all of the water out of Chicago into the Illinois River system through a sanitary canal. They blocked off the drainage from Lake Michigan, and that did solve their problem. They had cleaner water to drink, but it caused some problems downstream. From Chicago, just north of Peoria, we had fish kills like the picture we had here. So you had lots of pollution that came downstream. That's a problem. We also had literally 3 foot of additional water that came down the system because of this reversal. That was a major impact. Because of that situation, we started to see declines in the fishery. We started to see decline in waterfowl using the area. The mussels started to decline. So we found that actually these floodplains, that area where the river would, as you get a lot of rain, can spread out into, those floodplain areas are also good for farming. They were building industry in there and other things. And so they started to levee these areas off. All that means is they started to build these big mounds of dirt to keep the river out of the floodplain. This map shows out of the 400,000 acres that is the Illinois River floodplain, the red represents the 200,000 that's been isolated. That means 200,000 acres of floodplain is now disconnected from the river system. In addition, we put in locks and dams, and there's several of them. And these were set up to accommodate transportation. You can see the barge right here. And what these do is they create these pools of water. So they stabilize the water so that boats can move through them, then they lower them in a lock and they just keep traveling down. When you factor all this stuff together, I don't want your eyes to roll back in your head. This isn't as bad as it looks. It really has had a change on the way the river works, the hydrology of the river, the way the water moves through it. This top graph, the blue line, represents how the river worked more than 100 years ago. And it's very simple. Everybody understands this. In the springtime, it would flood, and in the summertime, it would dry out. And it pretty much operated that year, or that way, all the way up until we started making changes. The bottom graph represents how the river functions today. The only consistent part about that is that it's inconsistent. And this is bad because plants don't do well when they get flooded at the wrong time. Critters don't do well when they can't access those backwater areas at the right time. And consequently, you wind up with water quality issues. You wind up with a loss of productivity, a loss of plant diversity, and it's ripe for invasive species. And some of you probably experienced some of this, especially if you live close to the river. It creates a great situation for flooding. And we've had a lot of flooding impacts lately. This is Peoria.
So here we are in downtown Peoria, Illinois, a couple hours south of Chicago, and we're witnessing the flood of record. I've worked on the Illinois River here for more than 20 years and have never seen anything like this. It's taken a heavy toll on the Peoria area community and towns and cities up and down river. So we're here at the Emaquan Preserve, and we're seeing our levee overtop with peak flood event on the Illinois River, the first time since 1943 and the largest flood in history. What's happening is it's allowing this backwater area to fill with these floodwaters and potentially having an impact on neighboring areas along the Illinois River. We're seeing flood events like this more often these days. On 2011 on the Missouri, and then on the Mississippi River system, and today on the Illinois River. Largest events of record. Scientists look at climate models and predict that they'll continue to happen, increasing in severity and frequency.
So I like that video because it shows you these are some of the impacts, and these are real, and they have costs, not only environmental costs, but they have to our pocketbooks as well. We know a great deal about the river. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are all reports that you can look up on your own to find out what's happening with that river. You've got stuff by the Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources, the Nature Conservancy, Illinois Natural History Surveys, on and on. When scientists look at this and you sum it up to its least or its easiest component, if we could restore the river with its floodplain, that would be really good for the river's health. All that means is if the river had a relationship with its floodplain, it could actually get in there on occasion. So remember those isolated areas I talked about earlier. If it could get in there on occasion, that would really be good for not only the wetland, but also the river system. And that's what leads us to Emaquan. Emaquan is the Nature Conservancy's demonstration project to show that that relationship between floodplain and wetland can be really beneficial. We purchased Emaquan in 2000. It was the largest private land acquisition in the history of the state of Illinois. We bought about 6,600 acres, and it was about a $20 million land acquisition cost. Everything in green is what the Nature Conservancy owns today. You can see Route 7897 right through here. You've got Havana down here. There's 24 that would eventually lead into Peoria. You've got Dixon Mounds Museum right next door. You also have Chautauqua Wildlife Refuge and their Emaquan Wildlife Refuge. That's owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All total, on this little stretch of the Illinois River, we have 14,000 acres in conservation management. That's really big when you're talking about trying to manage these big floodplains. Okay, this green line is just simply our property boundary again, but I've laid it on top of a historic map of the area. So you can kind of see what it looked like in 1912. And you can see there was a historic Thompson Lake and a flag lake. And I also want you to look at all the diversity that was around us back in 1912. This is what it looked like when we purchased it in 2000. Much different. And not only are we different, but everything around us is different. There was a levee constructed. There's about 8 miles of levee constructed right along the Illinois River that keeps it out of Emaquan. And then there were 16 miles of ditches dug to drain the property so that it could be used for agriculture. From 1924 until 2007, Emaquan was in row crop production. So, this is basically what it looked like when we bought it. This is what it looked like historically. We had to figure out what were we going to restore to, knowing all these changes had happened to the river. What were we going to do? Here's the worst slide I have. Very boring. Group of people in a room, but I didn't know how else to symbolize this. We did a lot of planning. It took us years to do the planning with this. And we pulled people from all over the country to help us think through what kinds of restoration do we need. They came up with 2 things. First, we had to figure out what were those things we were going to watch throughout our process to tell us how we were doing. All right, so it's the monitoring, the research end of it. Birds, fish, those kinds of things. If they start to decline, we know we've got a problem and we may need to change our management. That was really important to our overall system, the science built around Emaquan. The other thing that they did, and it's reduced to a map, which is pretty simple, but still, we looked at the habitat types. What kinds of things could we do and do well based on the current situation? So the things in black are the things that we've actually accomplished so far at Emaquan. Obviously, we've got the wetland, and you can see you've got the historic Thompson Lake here and the smaller Flag Lake. We planted a bottomland forest, we did an upland forest, we did tall grass prairie, and we did wet prairie. But remember, I talked about that relationship with the river. That was also identified as really important, and we're hoping by May that'll be done with construction. And I've got some video to show you what that's going to look like when it's done. So hopefully we will have at least this map part of it completed by the end of May. Okay, so what did we do so far anyway? Well, this is again what Emaquan looked like when we bought it. You can see the Illinois River right here. And within 3 years, we had a pretty good wetland. You can see the water returned, and I love to overlay this historic map. It amazes me after 80 years of farming how close the historic lakes look like the current lakes. Even though there had been a lot of change in that system, those lake beds were still there. It's pretty impressive. Believe it or not, the plants were still there too. So a lot of that seed bed, those historic aquatic seed beds, was sitting there waiting for the water to come back. Things like lotus, cattail, primrose, arrowleaf, alodia, all these emergent wetland plants that are so critical, they came back. They either had the seed there, wind blew them in, or they passed through a duct. But one way or the other, they came back. We didn't have to actively go out and plant those things. Fish are a different story. Once they're gone, they're gone. You have to bring those back. So we worked with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. We stocked 2.1 million fish into Emaquan. We did the typical crappie, bass, the things that fishermen like, but we also did more ancient fish like the bowfin that Theron's holding, or the spotted gar that Sally's holding in that picture. These things are real important backwater type fishes that would have been around in these areas hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I also have a picture up in the well, it'd be your right, where they're doing monitoring. So we sample these fish to see how they're doing, and that tells us long term what our management needs to be, so we can adapt or change as needed. Again, when the prairie's gone, it's gone, so we had to do some replanting. We did 91 different species of plant. We did a total of 600 acres, both tall grass prairie and wet prairie. And of course, we managed it with fire. This is a pre-meeting for fire. And this is a natural prairie fire at Emaquan that we've done. This is a couple of years ago now. We spend a lot of resources, a lot of staff resources, a lot of dollars to get our staff trained so that they can do these kinds of things. Serious situation, but it's very important.
10-4, I'm just watching for whirls on this side. You're going to get some pretty intense behavior here right when it wraps up.
These things act as a system reset, and we use them often on all of our properties throughout Illinois. We planted 310,000 trees, bottomland hardwood and upland plants. And the method they used, they just sat behind a tractor, they made a slit in the ground, and they stuck them in. Actually, 2 people did most of the planting for 310,000 trees. And then, of course, when you plant these trees, you have to start maintaining them. Other vegetation comes up. You want to try to keep those from out competing with your new trees. And so we have workers out doing some herbicide, some cutting to keep the native trees doing well. So the question is, if you build it, will they come? I think the answer is yes. Just this past February, we had 278 eagles at Emaquan, just at Emaquan. You wanted to see snow geese? That's about 100,000. That's again this February during Eagle Day event that we had at Emaquan. Those are all birds. I don't know how they figure out how to move. We have cormorants, and these are their babies. Kind of a face only a mother could love. We have lots of waterfowl. We'll see 100,000 ducks. We'll see a lot of geese. And then we'll also see American coots. I know a lot of people kind of laugh when they hear the coot. But we hold somewhere between 5 and 7% of the world population of American coots at Emaquan, which is still an impressive number. Osprey, egrets, black-necked stilts, pelicans, sandhill cranes, and of course, snakes, muskrat, beaver, otter. We've got the big 3 wetland species. But we're starting to see changes. We need to be able to manage our wetland. So think back to the fire photo where you burn the prairie, that's that system reset. Well, that flood and drought is real important for wetlands. It's like their system reset. They need that to survive well. It's good for the wetland, and it puts all that nice productivity back in the river while pulling some of the bad stuff out of the river at the same time. So our answer to that is this structure. This is under construction right now. You can see these 2 dark holes. These are just concrete tunnels that lead through our levee. This is Emaquan. This is the river. And it will allow us to gravity flow water out of Emaquan into the river as we need. So we can recreate that drought situation. If we need to recreate a flood, which so far we've never needed, but if we did, we could also pull water in. Now the river, remember I talked about the locks and dam, they're artificially held high. So the river never gets lower than about 429 feet above sea level. So if we want Emaquan to be lower than that, I just lost it. But this little structure right here is the pump house, or the pumps. We're able to pump water as well when the river's too high for us to gravity flow water out. So this is real important. Now you're looking at the riverside. This is Emaquan. This is the river. This structure is obviously a lot taller because the river gets a lot higher than inside of Emaquan. So this is a critical part of our management, and like I said, we're hoping by May we'll be able to start doing some actual on-the-ground management of our water levels. Let me go back. Science is real important to this. This structure has a lot of science built into it. We can put nets. We've got bubble curtains, sound curtains, all kinds of things. We can capture every fish or almost every fish that flows through it. So we're going to know a lot about what's happening at Emaquan with this new structure. And I encourage you, when you get a chance, call us. We'd love to show it to you because it's a pretty cool thing. Speaking of science, we do have the University of Illinois at Springfield. They built a field station on our property. And it's got lab space, dry lab, wet lab, classroom, dorm rooms. And we do somewhere between 15 and 20 different research projects at Emaquan every year. And we think this gate's just going to increase that. So we know a lot about what's happening at Emaquan. I'm going to skip that one. Okay. We're a demonstration project. To demonstrate things, you need the public out there. And this is kind of new for the Conservancy. Up until about 10 to 15 years ago, we bought property and we kept people off. With Emaquan, we thought getting people out here would be good because it would demonstrate the importance and hopefully build support for wetlands and floodplains. We also thought that it would help give us the opportunity to share our science and some of the techniques we're using for management. And then finally, we think it's good for compatible economic development. This recreational opportunity is good for the city of Lewistown and good for the city of Havana, which is next to us. So we built a visitor use area. This is our lakeside observatory. It's got a kind of a visitor kiosk to stay out of the rain and out of the sun. It's got boardwalks. We've got interpretive material that explains the project and the process we went through. We've got a second observatory called the Wetland. It's got a 2-story observation platform. It's got spotting scopes. And of course, we've got a boardwalk that folks can walk out on and get an up-close view of the water. And I'll skip that one and move to the next one. We do allow hunting. That surprises some folks. But if you're trying to demonstrate this and if you're trying to influence other folks, when you look at land ownership along the Illinois River, hunt clubs are a big piece of that land ownership. We'd like for them to think about different ways of managing their properties than what they do now. So we allow waterfowl hunting so those waterfowl hunters can go back to their clubs and their other managers and say, hey, we want you to think about what Emiquon's doing. So we hunt 3 days a week during waterfowl season. We also allow fishing for the same reason, for similar reasons as the waterfowl hunting. We see about 40,000 people a year come to our visitor use area, do our fishing programs, and then we have a couple thousand that participate in our hunting program every year. So we're getting a lot of people through the doors and hopefully demonstrating some of the work that we're doing. I know everybody likes to see the logos because that means I'm almost done. This is all the people that help us. I don't want folks to think that the Nature Conservancy's done this alone. We've got a lot of partners. A lot of people have been helping us think this through. I encourage you, if you want to know more, please go to our website. If you're interested in learning more about the project, if you're interested in job opportunities, internships, all those kinds of things, our website's a great place. You can also just simply phone call my office and we'll talk to you there too. Thank you.
We have a few minutes to question and answer. If you guys have questions or you guys and girls have questions for Jason about Emiquon or just working that way, that's great. Oh, yes. Jen.
Yes. So you said that you can tell what kinds of fish are coming through the corridor between the preserve and the river. What kinds of questions are you answering with that information? Obviously, that wouldn't be easy to do, so it must have some importance.
A big concern is common carp. We want to understand how they're very destructive to wetlands. I know the public's very concerned about the bighead and silver carp, the jumping carp. They don't do very well in these backwater wetland areas. They need about 30 miles of flowing stream for their eggs to work. But common carp are bad. They'll come in and they can root things out. We can let water in. This is going to get a little, I don't know, I'm going to get a little technical with it, but we can let water in at different columns. And there's studies that show fish move in different locations in the water column. So we can study, do carp move through the bottom more than the top, middle, what is that? The other thing is and we'll have a camera in there literally taking pictures of every fish or group of fish that move through, and they've got technology that can identify the type of fish by the way the image comes across. So I'm not going to have somebody down there counting them. Then we can also use sound barriers to start testing if that stuff works. Bubble curtains, all that kind of stuff. The reason there's 2 tubes, so you can have a control side, so there was a lot of work that went into trying to figure that out. Did that answer your question?
You had a question?
Yes. I was at Beverlin a while back looking at muskrats and stuff like that. And, I had a question. Do you have actual guided tours as well? Or?
Yes, sometimes. We don't do it a lot, but we do some of it. We used to rely on Dixon Mounds Museum to provide a lot of our education, but they're closed. We're hoping they'll open it back up. They oftentimes do. So that's something, if you look at our website or go to the Experience Emiquon website, which is kind of a partner thing, you can find more about tours and other program opportunities.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Tom.
I think I'm understanding that you're occasionally letting Illinois Water River into Emiquon?
Well, the gate's not done yet, so we haven't done anything yet. But the plan would be if we needed it for some reason, we could.
Then, if that's the case, do you worry about what's in the Illinois River other than fish getting into Emiquon? For example, heavy metal from old plants that are leaking into the river and that kind of thing?
Unfortunately, we already have that in Emequon, so a lot of that gets in there no matter what. One of the benefits, we're worried about it, but there are some benefits to us being able to do that. So, for example, nutrients that are causing the Gulf hypoxia. If we pulled in some river water, wetlands are uniquely positioned to process that stuff very efficiently and very quickly, and we could actually reduce some of that, actually clean it. So water comes in dirty, it leaves less dirty. Doesn't clean it out perfectly, but a little bit. So although we are concerned about it, we also see benefits to doing some of that. Yes, sir.
Jason, are you guys planning on putting do you have a webcam right now set up for that area?
We did have a webcam, and then with the flood, so we don't have it anymore. We're planning on, that new structure has got a lot of technology in it, and so we're hoping to put a webcam out actually at the gate so that we can monitor it, but that people can see what's going on, how it works. There's actually an eagle nest that sometimes is operating down there, and we could train it on that. So we're working on that. Yes?
Would you suggest a better time of day, week, or year to visit?
It depends on what you want to do. If you want to come fish, now is a good time. They're catching the heck out of crappie. If you want to come watch birds, that kind of September, October time frame is good for the big migration, for the fall migration. And then February, usually the first weekend in February, we do what's called Eagle Day. And that's the time where we're seeing a lot of eagles. That's when we saw the snow geese. So our answer typically is anytime you come to Emequon, it's a great thing to see. For birds?
Well, in general, I mean, outside of summer in general.
Yeah. If you're wanting to see birds, which most folks who come, birding's a big thing. It's that fall or that spring, early springtime. Yes?
What's the website called again?
Nature.org.
I didn't see the federal DNR yet. I'm guessing you guys associate with them as well.
Yeah, the Department of Natural Resources helped us do the fish stocking. So we worked with them to get the fish. They could get access to a wider variety of fish than we could just go out and buy. That was important to us, those backwater, ancient kind of fish. So we worked with them to try to get a native population into Emequon. Yes?
So my question is, across the river, there's that whole Chautauqua area. What is the connection between that? Have they done restoration over there, or is that just been left natural? I've not heard much about the connection between the two areas.
Yeah, so it's a different project because their levee is considerably lower than ours. So when the river reaches a certain height, it's just in there. So they have to manage a little bit different than what we're talking. Our levee's only been topped that one time, which was in 2013. They did have a huge willow and cottonwood problem. They actually, and this is a great thing about floods, they flooded that out, killed all those trees, and then they've removed that. And their bird population is huge right now. So what we work with them, it's kind of a tandem sort of thing. Our hope is if we're having a bad year at Emequon, maybe they're having a good year, so the birds still have a place to go, and vice versa. So having two, we don't have to manage exactly the same, but we both wouldn't want to be doing a major drawdown at the same time, because there's not enough of the habitat along the river to support that.
So you're at different levels, so you're providing deep water and shallow water.
That's right. And they're smaller than we are, so they're about 3,600 acres, I think. All right. Thank you, guys.